Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Gavinsky's Tutorials. Today I'm doing a walkthrough and review of Waymaker, a Midi plugin for desktop, iPad and iPhone by Aqeel Aadam. So he's the developer of Ridgewalk and Weeping Wall. I've done videos on both of those. And this app actually integrates with them in an interesting way, and I'll talk about that later. So Waymaker is trying to take a kind of Euro-rack approach to sequencing. Thank God, not in terms of using cables, no cables here, but it's more about how you combine modules in interesting ways. So in Waymaker, we do that by chaining different modules together or processing modules in different ways. So for example, here I've got a 3-step sequence, and then we've got a 4-step sequence and a 5-step sequence. And all of those notes from those sequences are being passed through to this module called weighted module, where these sliders here control the probability of different types of transposition. So we're basically getting a nice evolving sequence, and all very easy and interesting to set up. So you could add more modules. I could add another module here, and we've got a bunch of different modules that we could choose from. Or I could add a module before this one, and we can also rearrange all the modules as well. So there are a lot of modules that do things that I haven't seen in other iPad sequencers, and I have used a lot of them, although I must admit I've never taken the time to get into Drambo, and I know that has really powerful sequencer options. So if you're a Drambo user, let us know if there's anything new in here, or if there's anything about the workflow of this that is different from what Drambo can do. But there are things that I really love, like the ability to set the times in free rates if you want, so in milliseconds. And if you set up a few different sequences feeding into each other and they're running in free rates and stuff, you can do some really quirky, organic sounding stuff. It's also got custom scales as well, which is great, and not all sequencers have that, very few actually, and it's really annoying when they don't have it, so I'm glad. But you can also pick some scales from some drop-down lists and things. Also, just, in general, I'm just really enjoying kind of exploring, chaining these modules together in different ways. So Waymaker can also process incoming Midi, so you could just, play notes from your keyboard and get it to process those. I haven't got it set up like that at the moment, but we'll look at that later in the video. And I could also use other sequencers, like say Fugue Machine here, or Midi from your piano roll in your DAW or whatever. You could send that in and get Waymaker to manipulate that Midi in various ways. So pretty interesting. So there's also a cool mode called AAS mode, and AAS means Aqeel Aadam Sound, right? So just the name of this developer's company, where you have a custom UI for using Waymaker to control these other apps, various aspects of these other apps, like Weeping Wall and Ridgewalk. So I'll talk about that now just very briefly, but we'll look at it a little bit later in the video in more detail. And one important thing to mention, if you do have those plugins already and you want to use them with Waymaker, make sure you update them to the latest versions, otherwise it won't work. So here, for example, I've got Waymaker just doing a little kind of granular loop, and you can see we've got 7 loopers here. And so here I can use Waymaker to change the pitch of those, and I've set some glide time there as well. And would you see this as well? This is really cool. So if we look at the Ridgewalk UI, if I click here, you can see number of loopers 7. So what happens if I change that, bring it down? You see here the UI in Waymaker's updating. Super cool, huh? So yeah. We'll look at that a bit later. So a couple of little things to say before we move on. First thing, for desktop, if you want, there's a 1-week demo where you can use the app without restrictions during that week. For iOS, unfortunately, as seems to be the norm for some annoying reason, there is no trial mode. Another thing, this video is sponsored, so thank you very much, Aqeel, for sponsoring it, but I am being paid for my time, not my opinions, everybody. Making a video like this takes days of very intense preparation, in this case about 3 days of really hard morning to night work, so it's more than fair that I get paid for it. But the developer had no say over the content of the video, hasn't seen the video before I've posted it on YouTube, and I will, as I always do in my videos, have some critical, constructive things to say about the app. Also, if you don't understand much about Midi, this video and this app might be a bit hard for you to grasp. But if you watch the video a few times and start trying things in the app, you'll learn a lot, from this video and from using this app. And if you're already a Midi power user, I think you'll see as we go through this video that there are loads of interesting creative things you could do with this app, either alone or combined with other sequencers. So I've done really a ton of walkthroughs on Midi apps, and definitely I do think this one's very interesting. So I'm going to explain the app by demonstrating the factory presets and analyzing them. And I think that'll help us to understand how the different modules in the app work. It's really a good way of doing things. Now, you'll see different presets, by the way, when you've got this connected to control Weeping Wall or Ridgewalk, than if you've got it connected to send Midi out to other apps. So I'm going to jump over to look at the Midi setup that I've got over here, where it's sending Midi to Spelldoza. Now, to load Waymaker, you need to add it as a Midi plugin in your host. So this will be different for different hosts. In AUM, we open up a Midi channel. Let me just show you that. So go here, Midi, right? Open up a node, tap here, audio unit MIDI processor, and then select Waymaker, right? So that'll be different in different hosts. You'll have to figure out how to do that if you're using something different. So then you open Waymaker, and if Ridgewalk or Weeping Wall are loaded in your host, you'll get an option to connect to those on the left side of the UI here. But if you want to control other apps, you should instead just press Connect to Midi. And then make sure you route the Midi to the app that you want to send Midi to. So let's say I want to send it to that instance of Spelldoza. In AUM, for example, I would click on Midi routing here. And this is the third instance of Waymaker I opened. So it's got to connect this one to Spelldoza. So just tap here, and now they are connected, right? And I'm just going to disconnect that because I'm going to delete that third instance shortly. I don't really need it. So yeah, I'll just go over the UI very, very quickly before we get stuck in here. So basically, you open it up, we have here a step sequence. So we can change that here to something else, right? Choose one of these other modules. Again, we can add modules by tapping here or here. Here is where we deal with the scales, and we can set a custom scale or pick from the drop-downs. You also have an option to rearrange here if you have more than one module loaded, and you just drag them around. And there's something about reset here, but we haven't set up this to reset, so it's not available at the moment. I'll tap here, and if you see now, tapping there, it's brought up another UI. And so here is where in this step module, now this will be different, different UI for different modules. In the step module, we'll drag around to change the notes, and we can turn steps on and off and so on. If you look down here, you have some settings that you use to advance the sequencer, either by time periods. So here it's set to a quarter note, and we could set it to free time if we want as well. Or you could set it to advance when a note is received. So when it receives a Midi note, either from an external plugin or from some other module prior to this one inside this instance of Waymaker, then it will advance the sequence. This is really cool. A lot of things don't do this. And with some of the modules in here, you can do super interesting stuff with that. If you click up here, you get some different options. The exact options you get will depend really on the type of module. But here we're getting this generate option, which will allow it to produce MIDI notes. And you see here, we could turn this on and we could have that reset option if we wanted as well. And we have other controls. I'll look at these in more detail later. So we have another one, just a transpose option, which can transpose by semitones or by intervals in the scale, like up a fourth, down an octave, and all that kind of thing. And we have another one here, branches, and that's very interesting. Branches will just play their sequence once, they don't loop, and they're triggered by MIDI notes. We talk about those a bit more later, yeah. And we got two main types of modules inside here. Sequencers. So we got a step sequencer, a morph sequencer, a weight sequencer, sum, and Brownian. These are all things I'll talk about in the video. And then we have a bunch of different utilities. And I really love this beat utility, by the way. So yeah, I think now we're basically ready to look at the factory presets. Now, the thing is, unfortunately, the factory presets, in general, the preset system in this app is really not brilliant, I must say. But it's a pity the factory presets are not divided into generative options and transformative options. So this is important, I think, to pay attention to, because maybe if you're going through the presets yourself, you might suddenly find, oh, but I'm not getting any sound here. Well, that's going to be because it's a preset that needs MIDI to go in. So I have passed that feedback on to the developer. It would really be better if it was very clear here what type of preset it was, generative or transformative. So we'll go through at least most, I think, of these presets, and I think it'll be very interesting and you'll really learn a lot if there's anything you're not clear about. And as we go through these examples, the first time we meet a module type, the first time we meet one of these types, I'll talk about it in a bit more detail. And then when we go on through other presets, if they contain that module type, I won't talk about it in detail again. But you'll see the modules in use again and again. And so if you watch this video the whole way through once or twice, I think you'll have a really good understanding of the app and the various tricks you can use for sequencing things in novel ways. Okay, let's get into some demos. So let's look first at how to load a preset. Click here, click presets. You've got user presets, you've got stock, i.e. factory presets. Click the one you want, press load, press play up here. Bit convoluted and there are no arrows. I really wish there were arrows to scroll through presets. I'll make some constructive criticism about the preset browser later in the video. So here, let's click back and we get to the first thing that we've got. So what we've got here is a sum module, a generative sum module going into a step module, and the step module is being used to transpose the input, right? So this sum sequencer is a really cool module that I haven't come across before. Just turn the volume up a little bit there. Elastic Osc sounding really nice here. Did a video on this a few days ago. Highly recommended. Just change that a little bit. Okay. So this sum sequencer, I have not come across this before. So here, every time this sequencer advances, and it advances at this rate here, 16th notes, right? So every 16th note, the sequencer will advance, and what will happen is we got 4 stages here, and these stages will flip on or off. So if you see here, you see that visualized in these mountains. You see a few things. One thing is the mountain is showing the pitch there, yeah? So it's higher with the higher pitch and lower with lower pitch. But it's also lighting up, and that's showing is that stage on or off. Kind of cool, actually. So here we see this is set to 1. That means that when this stage is turned on, it will be on for 1/16th note, and then it will be off for a 16th note when it's turned on. So here we're setting the length of those in 16th notes. Here we're setting the amount of transposition. So the actual pitches that get played are determined by summing the currently active stages. And that sounds a bit technical, but it's not really that hard. So just think, for example, if this has a value of +2 and this has a value of +4, right? If these stages are both active at the same time, then the pitch will be +6 on the note coming in, right? So imagine, for example, a note of D3 comes in, and let's say you have a stage that's adding 2 and another stage that's adding 3, and they're both active. Then that's 2 plus 3, that means 5. So that's 5 semitones, so it's going to add 5 semitones on. So you put in a D and you're going to get a G, right? So yeah, this I think is very interesting, and you can also set it up, right, that it will advance when MIDI notes come in as well if you want, right? And if you set it up that this can be reset when an incoming note comes in, then when it's reset, it will play the root note, so go back to a C or whatever you've set up in the settings for your scale. Super interesting. So if we look here, yeah, we've got this sum sequencer, right? And that's going into this step sequencer. And the step sequencer is set to a bar, right, in length. And what it's doing is it's transposing this input by scalar tones every bar. So in this bar, it's not going to transpose it here, it's going to transpose it down a third. Here's transposing down a second. Here's transposing down a fourth, right? So create something that sounds a bit like a kind of chord progression, something, and some arpeggiation. Now you could make that a lot more interesting by changing the rate here. And remember, you've got free rate as well, which is just beautiful to play with. I love free rate, my God. It's so annoying that more apps don't use that. Some devs just don't understand the point of it. Hey, there is a point, it's great. And so of course you could also play around with the pitches. And you can automate these too, and I'll talk about that later in the video. You need to know some specific things to do that in this app. Okay, let me just pause there. So let's look at another preset. Let's look at this one. Phrasing loops. So I actually had to make notes for myself about which ones were generative and which are transformative, you know, because it doesn't have those tagged in any way here. It is really quite annoying, I have to say that. So I hope that that could be improved a little bit. So let's look at this phasing loops one. So again, you really need to remember to press load. That has caught me out quite a bunch of times. And then you also need to remember to press play. So here we have 3 generative step modules, right? Step, generate, and each is set to the same rate, 8th notes, right? But each has a different number of steps. So let's just play it and have a little look at that. So the first one, turn this up a bit. So the first one you can see has 3 steps, next one has 4 steps, next one has 5 steps, right? So this step sequencer is one of the basic building blocks in Waymaker, right? And what you have with all of these modules, remember, if you want more options, you've got to tap. If you're on this back page, if you're on this page, you're going to want to tap to get more options. And then if you want to go back to that other page, you're going to press this back button. I'm really not crazy about that UI implementation, but that's how it's done, right? And so then you can set the pitches for steps. You can turn steps on and off, and again we're seeing which step is being triggered, right? The mountain is changing color, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So change pitches here. Again, you know, we can set whether the rate is quantized or free, or set the timing and so on, set if it's going to move forward when you get notes coming in. That's really fun to play with. We'll look at that later. And also, by the way, when you tap here, edit stages on the bottom right, you can adjust the length and the velocity of each MIDI note. Right? That's nice to play with for sure. And yeah, if you tap Generate MIDI here at the top, let's just jump back. I'm going to press back here so I can see clearly the numbers of these. Again, I really do find this UI a bit confusing. So let's look at the first step here, and let's tap on it to get those more options, right? And then click here, Generate MIDI. See what I mean? There's a lot of like tapping and moving around between different dialogues and stuff. So here, note that it says allow notes. So this determines whether incoming notes should be allowed through or removed. So this is not allowing notes in, but if we go into the second sequencer here, right? And again, I really wish there was something on this page of the UI showing me that that is the second sequencer. I find it very easy to get confused. If we tap here, it is set to allow notes in, right? And same, I think, with the third sequencer. Let's see. Yeah, allow notes on is on, right? So if we toggled allow notes off, for example, in this third sequencer, then now we're only hearing the third sequencer, right? So this can also be something that you really might want to play around with. But you can also play around with the velocities, you know? Like here we've got a global velocity knob for this module. So we could set up different modules for each, different velocities for each module, right? But we can also, with this edit stages, go in and edit the individual velocities and note lengths and stuff. So let's try a couple of things. So let's see, let's change the rate of the second sequencer. Let's change that to, let's say, dotted eighths. Right, that's nice, isn't it? And then, you know, you could try maybe just changing one slider at a time in a sequencer. You know, it's fun to play with live. And go and make, you know, make a small change in another sequencer, go and change the rate in another sequencer or whatever. Just keep doing this over time, and things will transform in very pleasing, organic ways, right? So yeah, super fun to play with. Okay, and again, you know, you could modulate all this, but I think it's pretty fun to do it by hand. And look, I mean, you could also play around with the number of steps for each sequence. So I think you're starting to see, hopefully, despite some what I regard as not great choices concerning the UI, this can do some very cool stuff. If you're good with MIDI, you're probably thinking, I could do loads of interesting stuff with this. Okay, let's move on. Let's just press stop here and move on to the next preset. So click here, presets, stock, and I want this one here, rhythmic melodic sequence. Load preset and press play. Now, what we've got here is two modules. The first one is a beat module set to generate rather than transforming. And that is going into this second module called a morph module. So let's just look at the beat module, and we come back to this a few times in this video in different settings. It can do different things depending on its position. It's a really interesting module, this. So this is a pitchless utility. It just defines rhythms, right? And here we're using it to advance this morph sequence. So if I tap here, you can see the morph sequence is advancing every MIDI note. So every time it receives a MIDI note sent in by the beat module, the lit up mountain, which represents the active step, is moving forward, right? See that there? So we jump back to the beat module. It has two options, Euclidean rhythm and custom rhythm. So Euclidean rhythm, you set a number of steps. Here it's set to 8. We could change that. And then we set the number of notes that there will be. And it will just try to distribute those as evenly as possible. That's the idea behind Euclidean sequencing. A kind of even distribution of notes across steps, as even as possible. And you have this little offset control here as well. And here is the rate. So we could change that, and again, we could go in to the free timing. So nice. Let's just put it back to quantized time. So see, as soon as I tap here, it just starts changing to a custom one. That's kind of neat. So yeah, the custom one, you can also select from the drop down if you want. And here you just draw in yourself which steps are active and which are not. That can be really interesting for getting complex rhythms. So as I say, this beat module can be very interesting, used to rearrange incoming notes, and we'll look at that later. The morph module. So the morph module is similar to the basic step type module, but it can morph over time. So if you don't want a set to morph, tap it and then it will become locked. And you can also adjust the pitch range, by the way, here for your randomized notes. And so here again, remember it's set to move forward every time it receives a MIDI note, but we could change that so that it's based on time periods. And we could change the number of steps. And here we set the rate of change. So this is currently set to 1 change every 1 loop. That means every time it goes through the whole sequence, one of the sliders will move. And it'll move somewhere in this pitch range. Again, if you don't want a slider to change, or if you want to dial in a value yourself, just lock it and move it by hand to the value that you want. All the randomized pitches will be in this range. So it can be good, I think, to, in this kind of thing, maybe always have a couple of things locked and lock them to the root note, like for example the first note, and then it will actually sound like you're in that scale, the C major scale. If you have it set to C major, but you got all sorts of random values here, it might not sound at all like it's actually in C major. So yeah, super cool. Let's move on to the next one. Press stop, pause here. So this preset's called irregular resets. This is very cool. So here we've got a beat module going into a step sequencer, and the beat module is being used to reset the sequencer. So you can see here in the sequencer, tap here on Generate MIDI, reset is on. Whether the sequence should be reset when an incoming note is received, right? So every time here we get one of these white notes is hit by the playhead, the sequence will reset. Very cool. Now, the second module also is set to allow notes in, right? So every time the beat sequence is triggered, it's sending out a C, right? Because remember, the beat sequencer just sends out C notes. So it's sending out a C. So basically, every time the beat module sends out this signal, it's not just resetting the sequencer, it's also playing a C note. So if we went in here and turned that off, you can hear a slight difference. Maybe not so much with this particular audio, but with some you definitely can. So allowing that extra C in at the moment that it resets is also just kind of like making that C sound kind of accented. It just sounds a bit louder. And so, obviously if we get something like this, we're just getting a C all the time because it's always resetting. And so we could set it up so we've got a much longer one with very few steps, so it's not resetting that often, and the whole sequence can play out more. Super nice. Let's move on to the next preset. So the next preset is called Brownian chords. Tap, load, play. Now I've switched this out for Piano Tech. I want to show you something. That sounds a bit harsh, doesn't it? So tap here and bring the velocity down. Much nicer. No, let me just leave that reverb off. Yeah. Okay. So let's look at what we've got here. Just going to tap back so we can go to this view and see what the modules are and stuff. So here we have this Brownian sequencer. And then next we've got a chord module. So we haven't talked about the Brownian sequencer yet, so let's talk about that, and we'll talk about the chord module as well. So this Brownian sequencer is generating notes. This is another sequencer type I haven't come across before, based on Brownian motion. It's really cool. It produces very musical results, I think. So with the Brownian sequencer, remember, tap to get into this part of the UI where we see all this good stuff. So the probability knob, this 50% chance of falling, right? So the probability knob sets the chance that the next note in the sequence will be higher or lower than the current note. You see here, 0% chance of falling, 100% chance of falling, 50% chance of falling. And this is related to some of the other settings here. So we set the interval that steps will rise or fall by with the buttons to the left and the right. So if there's only a 40% of chance of falling, that means there's a 52% chance of rising. If it rises, it's going to go up a third. If it falls, it's going to go down a second. So we're just setting the intervals there. And we're also able to set the minimum and maximum notes allowed as well. Then here you have this thing here, wrap. So you got wrap or cascade. So wrap just means if the range is exceeded, the sequence will wrap back and play the root note. So once it goes over a G4 or under an A4, it'll immediately go back to a C or whatever it was that we set back here. It's set to a C major. All the presets are set to C major. If it's cascade, that just means if the range is exceeded, the sequence will have to ascend or descend using these intervals back to the root note, right? So also when the sequence is reset, for example, by rewinding, or if you set it up in Generate Midi, that reset is on, that it can reset with an incoming note, then also an incoming note could reset the sequence to the root note. So in this preset, these notes are being sent to a chord module. So the chord module adds harmonies to each note received to create a chord from a single note, right? So you can have up to 5 harmonies added to each note. So in this preset, we're adding only 4 harmonies, because this last knob is set to off. And by the way, we also have it set to allow Midi in. So yeah, in total, that's just a default actually that notes come in. So yeah, even though we've only got 4 knobs here, we're still hearing the incoming notes, so we're getting 5 notes each time. And so if we added this last one, then we'd be getting 6. You can hear it easier with the lower setting there. So nice, huh? And nice to play with these individually yourself. And if we turned all of those off, we'd have no chords, just the incoming note. By the way, there's no double tap to set to default. I find that very irritating. I really hope it gets added. I spoke to Aqeel about it, and he kind of prefers not using things like that because maybe he thinks that people might do things accidentally, but I don't know, it's just such a basic gesture, and I think that most people expect it and most people like it. If you see here, I'm double tapping and nothing's happening. So again, developers will make changes based on feedback from the audience. So if those kind of things are important to you, then give that feedback. Do remember, of course, here that the intervals available will depend on the scale. So if we change this to something else, then it's going to sound different, right? Now, we've got a lot to get through, so let's go on to the next preset. But I hope you're seeing here, it's versatile, right? Like combining these modules in different ways, you can seriously do a lot. All right. So this one's called Randomly Advancing Sequencer. So here a beat module is sending out 8th notes. Tap here, we can see, right? 8th notes. Sending out 8th notes into a probability module set to 70%, i.e. on any step, there's a 70% chance the note will play, right? And then this is going to a Brownian sequencer, which is using its settings to generate pitches within the parameters set by its controls, right? Now, for this particular tank drum sound, those low notes aren't going to sound all that great, so I'm just going to change it C4 to C5. So we talked about the Brownian sequencer and stuff already. If we tap here, you can see that allow notes is set to off, right? Now, if we turn this on, we're letting in those C notes from the beat module. And it can actually be pretty nice to do that from time to time, but if it was all the time, it might be a bit much. Okay, so we're able to get through these presets much faster now because you're already familiar with a lot of the modules. Let's go to the next one. So this one is called Random Rhythmic Chords. Let's see what we've got here. So here we've got a Brownian sequencer, and that is going into a beat module. And the beat module is set to rearrange Midi. So it's affecting the rhythm of the incoming notes. And this is super interesting. So it's set here to rearrange Midi and transpose by scale or tone. So it's going to use those scale intervals. But what I want to look at here, and which we didn't see earlier, was when we looked at the beat module, because earlier we were looking at it as generative, is the options that you have here. Hold all, mask, or hold one. So this is really super clever. So basically what hold all is doing is it's collecting any notes received since the last active step, and then it plays these notes, right? So if you imagine that, over here, this thing here is spitting out different notes. But then here, we've got these periods where it's inactive, so it's not playing notes, but it's basically collecting those notes. And then when this step comes, it'll play all those notes that it received in these 2 periods of time. It's super cool. I've never come across anything like that myself so far. I'm sure some, probably used somewhere, but I haven't come across it. Now, hold 1 is a variation on that. It will just hold only the last note. So it'll collect all those notes, and then it will play the last note that was played before this, but it will ignore the ones that were played, like here, for example. Or you got another one, mask notes unless stage is active. And that's basically like a kind of gating thing. It won't collect notes, it won't hold them in that way, but it will only let them through when these gates, let's say, are open here, right? So when it's on one of these white steps. So very, very cool indeed. Okay, let's go on to the next one. This is called Added Glitter. So here we've got a morph module. Tap here to go into the next module, and that's feeding into a branch type step. So we could just call that a branch. So a morph module feeding into a branch. So branch sequences don't loop. They just play one time when they receive a MIDI note. So I haven't come across these before either, actually. So if we click here on Add MIDI at the top of this branch step module, we see some settings, right? So one is that we have an option to keep the note that triggers the branch. So if we turn that off, we're going to have fewer notes. So I think it sounds good with keep. We keep that on. Let's turn this up a little bit. And this hold button here, so use this to decide whether the branch will always play in full or whether it will only play as long as the note triggering it lasts for. So you might not really notice that here. It would depend really on the speed perhaps of the previous sequence. The transpose button is on, so that means the branch is being transposed by the incoming note. So if we turn that off, we're going to get a lot less pitch variety. And probability here is set to 40%, and that just means the branch is not triggering every time a note comes in from the first module. It's only triggering 40% of the time. Right? Let's just see what it's like with free timing there on the first module. Okay, let's go on to the next one. So this is the last preset I'm going to look at from the generative ones before we move on to the transformative ones. So this is called Rearrange Chord Voicing. So here we've got a beat module, right? A beat module set to generate MIDI, and it's set at a rate of a quarter note, so it's just spitting out C notes. And these are going into a chord module, which is adding some scale intervals. It's adding a third and a fifth. And then that's going into, if we tap here, it's going into the next module, which is a weight module, and that is transposing those C chords to other chords that fit the C minor scale. So the weight module, let's talk about that. So that lets you set the pitches that you want. Right? And adjust the likelihood that that pitch will be played. So here there's a 34% likelihood this one will be played, 34, 33. So we can adjust these to change the weights. Really cool. And so there are a bunch of things we could do, to spice things up. We could go back to the beat module and change the number of steps. or we could change to a custom rhythm, change the speed maybe to something a lot faster. You get the idea. Change to free timing there and adjust it by hand. Okay, next one. So the first transformative preset I'm going to look at is called random octave jumps. Now, let me just play in a note here. So make sure that you're feeding Midi into Waymaker for these. So for example, here I'm feeding the AUM keyboard into Waymaker, AUM being the host that I'm using. Feeding that keyboard in, and I've also got it set up here to feed in an instance of Fugue Machine, but I've got Fugue Machine bypassed at the moment. I'm going to show you that in a second. So here, this is set up to use a wait module to transpose Midi. Now, we've talked about the wait module before, so I won't really go into that again. So let's just play a C note. And what you see here is that is basically sometimes being put an octave up because we've got this slider here set up an octave. So there's 25% chance it's going to play an octave up from what I input, and there's 75% chance that it will just play the note that I entered, right? So now we could also send then something like Fugue Machine in there, and now it's doing it to that Midi. And again, you can use the Midi from your piano roll and your DAW or whatever, right? And so there's a lot of different things that we could do here, We could put in different pitches on these. We can add more steps, change the weights around, and so on. We could turn on, by the way, transpose Midi. Let's just change that to generate Midi. And turn on allow notes, and you see the difference there, right? So really important to pay attention to whether you're generating or transposing. Just jump back here. See this one? Right? Yeah, no. Let's keep it as transpose. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Try and keep things snappy. So this one's called Play Along With Me. So here we have a step sequence, and you can see it's set to play certain notes. We go back, we can see the scale is set to C minor. If we click here and click on Generate Midi, we can see that Allow Notes is on. Right? So this is going to add harmonies to incoming notes, but just make sure that you're playing in, you're playing in MIDI notes that fit the scale, right? So we're going to play in notes in C minor here. And we're getting these extra notes added in, but they're all notes that fit the scale. Pretty cool. There's a lot of things you could do here to spice this up. You could add in maybe probability modules and stuff. So it's not actually going to trigger a harmony every time, just sometimes you'll get them. And I mean, there's just a million things you could do. So let's go on to the next one. And the next one, presets, stock. This one, we look at pseudo arpeggiator. Okay. So look, just a little manual note entry. So just pressing a C here. So what this is doing is it's using a sum module set to transpose Midi, right? And it's just quantized to the scale. So C minor also here. All right, next one, rhythmic quantizer, presets, stock, rhythmic quantizer. Okay, load. Always press play. I'm really not used to having to press play on these kind of things. So let me see. I'm going to just change it to major here. And so this is using a beat module here again, right? Beat module set to Euclidean. Let's just tap here and change the number of steps. So let's change it to say 5, and we'll just keep this first one active. So remember all these things that we've got here, right? Hold all and so on. So let's just try feeding Fugue Machine in here. So you see now Fugue Machine is feeding in these notes and it's holding them and then it's just releasing them all as a chord here, right? So nice. And we could change that to hold 1. Remember, that's just holding the last note that came in during these inactive stages, or mask notes, just letting things out. Only letting things out when they come through when these steps are on. Really nice one, this. Okay, next, what have we got? Add trills, it's called. Okay, let's just take Fugue Machine off here for a minute. And let me just see. Okay, so this is set to C major. Okay, fine. And let's just see. Let me press play there. Oh, yeah, there we go. You see, that's adding these little trills. It's really nice, isn't it? And so look at this sequencer. Let's just change that speed. Let's slow it down a little bit. Say dotted eighths. Let's try now putting Fugue Machine in through that. That's pretty nice, isn't it? Or we could change it so that it's advancing on note input. Really sweet. Next one. Random chord extensions. If you're enjoying the video, everybody, if you find it useful, please smash the like. You know, it's very, oh man, every time I make a video on a complex MIDI sequencer, I always think, God, you know, I always forget how much work is involved. It's honestly a massive amount of work trying to make a decent video on these kind of complex MIDI apps. It really is. So thanks again to Aqeel for recognizing that and sponsoring the video. As I said at the beginning, he's not paying for my opinion, he's paying for my time. Okay, so let me just load this again, actually. I don't want to change it first. I do really wish these were organized into subfolders. Let's just turn that off first. So see, this is called random chord extensions, right? And so it's just a chord module adding extra notes. And so we could change, you know, change the feeling of the chord by changing those intervals. Lovely. And then you've got stuff like, you know, remove every third note. There's 2 of those in there. It's a mistake. It should be just 1. So let me put Fugue Machine through. So here we're using a beat module set to rearrange MIDI. It's transposing by scale or tone, so it's using those scale intervals. And it's set here to mask notes. And it's Euclidean sequence, 3 steps. And so it's only letting notes through when this step triggers. Really cool. So we could change which steps are active, we could change how many steps are active, and so on. We could try changing the mode. Great. Now there's one module not covered in the presets, and I'm just going to mention it. It's called the channels module, and I'm not going to bother, I just don't have time, guys, to set this up. But basically what you could use this for is to distribute notes to different MIDI channels, right? Based on a variety of different options, right? So here, you're turning whether it's off or which channel it's sending to. And then here you've got these different options like rotate, right? So every note will be sent to one of these given channels, and the channels will be rotated through so that each channel is guaranteed to send regularly. It'll try this, then this. Now we've got another one, random. So each note will be sent at random to one of the given channels. Shift register, that's pretty interesting. So each note will cascade through the channels. What does that mean? It just means when a note is received, it'll be sent to the first channel, and then when another note's received, that note will be sent down to the next channel, and then the new note sent to the first channel. The notes just keep getting passed on. Maybe this is something that Aqeel will demo. I know he's planning to make a video. It does sound cool, but I'm just kind of rushing really I've been rushing for 3 days to get this video finished, so I'll leave it at that. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the AAS, right, the Aqeel Aadam Sound mode specific modules. So okay, here I've got Weeping Wall. I just played a few notes into it and made it do this nice little kind of micro looping thing. And so AAS mode, that's what we use to have a special kind of UI for dealing with these other apps by Aqeel, Weeping Wall and Ridgewalk. So let's just look at how we set that up. So click on a Midi node, that's how we do it in AUM anyway, and open up an instance of Waymaker. And let's just maybe keep both of these open here. So if you see here, it says connect to Weeping Wall. So I select that, and now we're able to control these loops. Right? Now, and you can also, so here I've got it set to use a shift sequencer, right? But we can use all the other ones as well that we've just looked at, step, morph, and so on. And there's another one also called Midi, but we just quickly look at this shift one just in case it's not clear yet. So this is just a super simple module. It'll just change the pitch of each of the loopers independently. And the UI will change here depending on how many loops there are here. And here we've got this little thing, look, glide. So we can set reverse to make loops reverse, or we have forward here, or auto. I'm not actually sure what that auto is. I just leave them all on forward for now. But we also got this little glide thing here. So the glide thing's nice. So here we can set in a glide time in seconds. So if I change something here, now we're getting that glide time. It's going to take 1 second to glide to the new value. That's super nice, isn't it? And then there's another module in here, which is different from the ones that we just looked at. So this is another one that's kind of unique to this AAS mode. So I had to tap a few times. I found that a few times with this UI. It seems a bit sticky sometimes. I don't know. it's a bit different. So this will transfer the MIDI input from Weeping Wall to Waymaker. So just now I had it set up, you know, that I was feeding MIDI in there. Let's see now. So MIDI input now transferred into Waymaker. Is it going in there? Hang on, let me see. It's also set it up for Fugue Machine. Okay. Did that automatically. Let me change it to keyboard. There we go. It, you know, it saw that like Fugue Machine was still sending MIDI in there, so it sort of automatically assigned it, but because I wasn't trying to enter a note on the keyboard, it didn't gather that I wanted that keyboard mapped. So now you can see I'm changing the pitch of the loopers here with the keyboard. Drag this over. So that's our root, right? And, you know, here the scale is set to octaves and fifths, so it's quantizing that. So I could change that, and I could set it, you know, I could adjust it in a custom way, or the other option is octaves. Oh, nice. So Waymaker can only repitch an octave maximum up or down, so you should enter notes within that range. So let's just change to custom. So you see now I'm able to enter in all values. I could go in here and just turn off these black notes, so it's just white note quantization for a C major. Very cool. So when you save presets in Waymaker here, so remember it's got its own preset menu when it's used in AAS mode. And you also get an option here to save not only the preset data, but also the client data, i.e. the data for Ridgewalk or Weeping Wall. Pretty cool. Now, just mention quickly, there are also, let's just look at a MIDI instance here. So I'm just going to turn that off. We don't really need it right now. If we click here, we have this option here, assignable parameters. So this will allow us to assign different parameters to control this module. So set up CC control basically. So if we go actually and we click on the presets, we can see if we go into stock presets and we go down near the bottom, we have some presets which have pre-assigned parameters. So let's just click on this step one, pre-assigned parameters, and let's click here on assignable parameters, and you can see here it's set up that we have all these different pitches going up to 16 steps all set up. Now we tap here and we can choose different things. We could assign note length, velocity, sequence, speed, octave. You know, these options that were available here will depend on the modules loaded. And so this is important because you need to do this if you want to control this plugin with LFOs or with, you know, automation of various types in your host app. Then you need to set these up. See, normally most apps, you wouldn't really have to do anything manually there, but an app like this that has this kind of very flexible architecture, you know, modules there could be all kinds of different modules loaded in all kinds of different orders. And every module could have, you know, different step numbers and so on. It's not really feasible to do it in the normal way. So that's why you now have these assigned in here. And now let's say I wanted to send an LFO in to set up step 1 pitch. I would just do it here, set up the channel and the CC number that I'm going to use for that LFO, just say CC16 or whatever, and then route that LFO in. How you do that will depend on your host. And now you can use an LFO to control that. All right, so let me just load a little basic preset here. And I'm going to point out some areas that I think could be improved. So overall, I could imagine this with a different UI, a better UI. It can be pretty hard to get used to where everything is, I find. So I definitely have got much more used to it in the few days that I've been using it, but I can certainly imagine this with a different UI. Things like having to tap on the controls for a loaded module to bring up these extra controls really threw me off quite a lot at the start. And I still think I sometimes need to think a bit too much about where things are. I definitely have got more used to it, but also I feel like there are a lot of different little screens in this, but they've got tons of space. I feel like with a different design, everything could have been fitted on one screen, and that would have been a better user experience. There are some really fantastic ideas behind this app, but the UI is a weak point as far as I'm concerned. Also, I think that it'd be really helpful if there was a way to temporarily bypass any sequencer. If we're in a preset or a patch, let's say, whatever, where you have a bunch of different sequencers or modules, it could be really interesting to temporarily turn one off without removing it or having to change its settings. I have found myself missing that functionality, and I've mentioned that to Aqeel, and he said he might add it. And then another thing is issues with the preset browser. So, you got to tap to open the preset, you have to tap to select one, you have to tap again to load it. There are no arrows to navigate from one preset to another. There are no submenus, which presets are generative, which need incoming Midi, and so on. At the very least, preset names here should have as a prefix some type of indicator as to the type, generative, transpose, etc. And also, when you go back into the preset browser after having selected a preset, it doesn't show you which preset you've selected, so you have to remember. And the main UI also doesn't show you the name of the preset either. And there is no way to delete presets in here. There's no way to rename presets. So this is definitely an area for improvement. And I've mentioned this to Aqeel. He said he's not really much of a preset user. I said, I think, though, there are a lot of people who do use presets and they care about how preset systems are set up. Another thing is, I kind of wanted to use AUM's preset system, but I've been having quite a few crashes with using that. I saved presets there, and then when I loaded them, they crashed Waymaker. So there's a little bit of bugginess in there for sure, but hopefully that'll be ironed out soon. Another thing, the iOS, the app here on iOS, I would like to see export options. There are no export options, not even for single presets, never mind batch presets. So if you're a professional preset designer, let's say, and you wanted to make a pack for this, you couldn't do it without getting the developer to help you to bundle that pack together into the kind of file that could be imported into this. Or you'd have to use the desktop version. A lot of iOS apps are weak in the preset area, and this is definitely one of them. Another thing I noticed is this runs my iPad battery down a bit faster than normal, so it could do with a bit of optimization there. And another thing that's a kind of small point, but it does niggle at me. Most apps have a double tap to reset, but this doesn't. I change a value here, maybe I want to set it back to 0. There's no double tapping anywhere at all to reset in this UI. It's a really standard feature of most plugins, so I do hope it gets added. But conclusion, I really am enjoying experimenting with Waymaker. It can do some super cool stuff that I definitely can't do with other sequencers that I have. And I've learned how to use a lot of different sequencers over the years. And I've made videos on so many sequencers on this channel. Check out my Midi, Generative Midi or Midi apps or something. I've got a playlist there with tons of stuff in it. So Waymaker, it is definitely something that will reward people who like going deep with Midi. I wouldn't think it's a great starter sequencer for people new to sequencing unless they're really willing to put the work in, because with a modular setup like this, you do really need to understand what you're doing. But I think if you like Midi, it's really worth putting that work in. When I first started working with Midi sequencers, there was so much that I didn't understand. And I'm so glad that I put the time in to learn that, because Midi is such an amazing tool. It's an amazing creative tool. So if you can get past the criticisms that I made, the UI and the preset system, if you can get past those things, the creative potential of this is enormous. And then being able to use the sequencers and utilities here to control Weeping Wall and Ridgewalk, and maybe future apps as well by this dev, I'd imagine, adds another whole level to explore as well. So I hope you found this useful, everyone. It is long, but there's a lot going on in this app, and trust me, watching an hour-long video on this is a much faster way to learn than working through the manual and figuring out everything yourself. At least I wish I'd had a video like this to watch instead of reading through the manual. But at the same time, I'll just say there is a lot to be said for figuring this stuff out yourself. If you're the kind of person that's always just doing things by watching videos, a lot of your knowledge might be kind of passive unless you're really watching stuff again and again and really going in and applying it. All right. Thank you for watching, guys. Thanks for your support. Thanks to Aqeel for sponsoring this. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you in the next video. Take it easy.